across the narrow sea, the French are shuffling yet again, and everybody's talking about it. But I'm not here to talk to you about the French. I'm here to talk to you about a dark horse, exciting candidate to compete against Cloud9, and that's Tempo Storm. Okay? The lineup of Tempo Storm has been Rick, Stanislaw, Hades, Shazam, and Glorens. Okay? Glorens, solid player, good player. Hades, pretty good. I think people know who Hades is. Smart guy, really got a good head on his shoulders, understands the game of Counter-Strike, good solid player, he can make plays. Both these guys were cut in late June, and the core three of Shazam, Rix, and Stanislaw brought in Roka, and they brought in Automatic. Originally they brought in Rush, but Rush came back, left back, and went back to Elevate. Now, the players that they brought in make them an exciting team, but I think the most exciting thing about it is that the players they brought in allow Tempo Storm to play a little bit differently than they have before. What I mean by that is everybody on that team is very strong. They're very skilled. They're aimers, okay? Rix is a very unheralded talent in Tempo Storm, but Rix isn't going to be the make or break player on Tempo Storm. Automatic can be the make or break player, and I'll get into that later, but it's not so much make as break. He can be the break player. Automatic can break Tempo Storm and ruin Tempo Storm. Roka is an extremely talented player, especially for his role. As an entry fragger, he's probably the best entry fragger in North America. There's not too many people who want to entry frag and are as good as he is because it's such a disadvantaged role. And a lot of players, although they can be aggressive, they can't do anything with it. And that's what brings me into my biggest point, is aggression and the player who can make Tempo Storm into just an absolutely exciting team. They'd be exciting to watch. They would have the talent to do it. And if they did it, depending on their play style, they could absolutely compete against and contend against America's new darling Cloud9. And that player is Shazam. That's right. Shazam can make Tempo Storm into an absolute dominating team. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Now, with Stanislaw, from the demos that I've seen, Stanislaw has just been an aware guy. He's also got decent aim. He's a very smart player. He's a well-rounded player. And he has what I notice is just his team awareness. He's very aware of where his team is, what his team is doing. And if he can become a role player along with even Roka in an entry role, I would define the entry role as a role player role, because you're baiting for your teammates, so they're trading off of you, and you're kind of like feeding for a trade. And if you play trade or strike, it can be that way, as opposed to like a set huge execute kind of thing where you're setting everything up for him, in which case there's two support players setting up for the primary carry, which is the entry, or maybe even an op who's entering or behind him, like in the styles of Na'Vi and Titan. If you look at more normal teams, though, the guys who are necessarily going to be carrying are going to be like the Opper, the Lurker, or the trade fragger, playmaker, second guy in. And in the team of Tempo Storm, you know, that depending on how Tempo Storm is going to break down, that could be any one of people. Because another thing about Tempo Storm, and I'll actually get into this later, is the fact that they're being coached by Warden. Okay? Which gives them a dynamic that not a lot of teams have, and gives them a leg up on a lot of North American teams, considering who Warden is and his competence as a human being and as a coach, as a manager of people, and his general Counter-Strike knowledge. Although it's a little bit outdated, there's a new style that's coming in, and I would like them to work with that new style along with the old. But back to the player who's going to make the biggest difference for Tempo Storm, and that player is Shazam, man. Now, what do I mean by that, right? Now, Shazam is a player who's extremely talented, just amazing skill, raw skill, amazing talent. But Shazam's biggest problem whenever I watched him is always that his style never really worked for his skills. Meaning his play style never suited his skill, and his play style can suit his skill, and I've been seeing it more and more out of him. I think in response to some of the things he was doing on Cloud9, maybe he looked back at it and he realized it was wrong. Cloud9, he was always a very passive player early round, and he would have the talent to really break rounds open and almost never necessarily do it. So he'd always be protecting his op, and I'm talking about when he has an op. Even with a rifle or a pistol, it was very rare to see Shazam run into bedroom like that and do something extremely aggressive in that sense. Shazam is not necessarily the most aggressive Counter-Strike player, as you see what you can see from here. He was almost always a player who would work off of his teammates, kind of like a reactive player, unlike Roka, instead of being an aggressive player who's making things happen. And he was a player who would be alive in late round situations, and he'd kind of mess them up. Whereas in light of like when a situation's almost pretty much won, Shazam would make like a peek or would do something that would necessarily not be there. Somehow, some way, he's almost always positioning himself in ways where he's the last guy alive, and he's kind of pretty much using his teammates as a buffer zone towards him making the play. Now, if you look at an opper like JW, he's almost always doing the opposite. He's almost always making the interaction, and instead of playing reactively off of his teammates' interactions, he's the one making interactions and using his raw skill and aim and movement and spawns to really make just these amazing plays. And if anybody's seen Shazam with the op, they've seen his ability to make these like just nutty shots. Just skill-wise, him playing aggressively could be very devastating to a team. To the enemy team, that is. But he almost never plays this way. So my biggest request that I could make out of Tempo Storm and of Shazam, for Tempo Storm to be successful, is for Shazam to start playing extremely aggro. For Shazam to pick up JW style. Because if you look at what North American teams have and why they can't play like Fnatic, it's because they never have an opper who has the sheer confidence and play style of JW along with the skill of JW. You'll find oppers who have the confidence and play style of JW, and they almost never make it out of open or like IM because they just don't have the skill to back it up. And if you do have the skill to back it up, you usually have the sense to never put yourself in those kinds of positions. Now, the most interesting thing that I've seen out of Cloud9 or out of Tempo Storm is their decision to pick up Automatic. The reason why I say Automatic can make this team, can break this team, is because if you look at like Automatic's time with Nylum, I'm not going to assume what happened there, but I'm just going to talk about what was observable and what was fact. A lot of what happened with that team came from basically what Semphis wanted to do when he got there. I think on Cloud9, Semphis was pretty much the bitch boy of that team. Semphis would do whatever Nothing didn't want to do. He would do whatever Sean Garrers, wanted him to do in the terms of like basically filling in for pretty much whatever anybody didn't want to do. Semphis was there doing it. And in that sense, when Semphis came to Nylum, he was like, yeah, well, guess what? I'm going to do basically, I'm going to play the positions I want to play, and I'm going to play the places I want to play, and I want to play the roles that I want to play. And I think even somebody like Automatic turned into switching things up and being kind of rigid in where he wanted to play. And that having rigid players like that, not having a lot of open players, made other players have to change where they were playing. on some CT sides. And then also what you found is like Hiko, who's possibly the best player lurking wise in North America, didn't lurk anymore. He instead became more of a support player with Nylum. And then you had automatic lurk. So automatic started lurking, and it could have been either thing. It could have been, Hiko didn't necessarily, feel like his lurking style was fresh and exciting anymore, and he wanted to kind of give it a rest, maybe give it a break, and do other things. But a lot of where you see Shazam's aggression is against ecos. And if you look at a player like Automatic, he was almost always also like doing late round solo pushes, CT side. So these are some things that like pop off immediately. As you see Shazam getting a 4K against a full eco, getting his teammate to flash him in and pushing Boiler. You almost never see Shazam doing this stuff with a full buy or against a full buy. But he should. His playstyle should be dramatically different when he's playing against an eco and when he's playing against like a buy, right? But I mean, Shazam can honestly be a really strong aggressive opper just by virtue of how he plays, but he likes to protect his gun, and I understand that he likes to protect his gun because it's a very expensive one. But to see Shazam, who I think is one of the only players that can actually take on JW's playstyle, if he had the confidence and the bravery to do it, I think he would actually come off and surprise a lot of people by just playing aggressively in a gun round, because that's not characteristic of Shazam. Shazam's a guy who likes to protect his op and likes to almost, if you were watching him T-side, he'd almost always have one or two teammates ahead of him at all times in the map, wherever direction they're going. Now, primarily, if Automatic is able to do what his team wants out of him, and he's able to kind of take a very role player minded role on his team, then that'd be strong. But the crazy thing about roles and identity is Warden is coaching this team for Tempo Storm. And Warden's an old 1.6 guy. And the biggest thing about Warden is that he's Warden doesn't believe in roles. That's how 1.6 he is, in the sense that Warden is a Counter-Strike player who comes from the meta of, hey, it's 1.6, and we have our opper, and that's a role. The opper is an opping role, not a position, not a tool that you use where you could have different roles depending on. Then you have your 4 riflers, and your 4 riflers basically just go places based on spawn, So if you have a good spawn, and that's fine. That works for 1.6, where like the nades weren't as powerful as they are in like CS:GO, where flashes were very powerful and T-sides could use flashes very effectively, with the smokes. There weren't any incendiary grenades and like in 1.6, so you could spawn and go, work off of spawn and have people's roles be decided based on spawn. But I'm just going to go ahead and say it. People are going to probably get pissed off at me. CS:GO is more like Source than it is like 1.6. So it's a lot more like Source. It uses the Source engine. It's ported from Source. It's pretty much Source. So if you look at like executes and teams actually playing to the strength of their abilities, that's where roles come in. And Warden actually will probably help Tempo Storm in not making them role based, and in more making everybody kind of play off of each other depending on whatever needs to be done, like actually getting done. And that's really the craziest thing about Tempo Storm is they have so many good aimers on this team now. And they have not just aimers, but like solid role players like Stanislaw, who can also aim, and like Roka, who can very clearly aim and very clearly just shut things down and make things happen. And the craziest thing that you might find in the whole Tempo Storm organization, other than obviously what you might have with Automatic or Shazam's ability, is a player like Rix. Now, Rush was always a player who could work off of Roka's aggression and be very lucrative in doing so. Roka actually opened a lot of things up for his team just simply by doing just that. Just by his sheer movement and his ability and his way of sniffing things out. I wish I could also show you guys just a T-side demo of Roka and how Roka can play this game. But Roka's ability to open things up along the map will basically show you exactly what's going on in Tempo Storm. That if you look at what Rix is able to do without Roka in Tempo Storm, you'd be able to see that both these players can be extremely beneficial in tandem. And the only player who could be like a wild card for this team, or not a wild card, but a player who could really like break open this team and make them extremely exciting, is Shazam. And that's really the difference maker, is how will Shazam play when he plays for Tempo Storm? You know, is he going to really break things open and be an aggressive opper like JW because he has the talent to be so? Or will he continue being just necessarily like the very methodical Shazam who gets aggressive at totally the wrong times and is passive when his team doesn't really need him to be? Just in virtue of saving his op. Well, not saving it, but protecting it, so to speak. Now, there are some Counter-Strike players that are completely going to disagree with me saying, you know, how dare you say Shazam changed his style? You know, he's been doing it. It's been successful for him, and there's reasons why he does it, and all of that. But Shazam, honestly, if he were to change his style up, he could be a very strong player, is all I'm saying. I'm not saying what he's doing now isn't working for him. It is. He's been able to be very successful with it. But when you look at who could play like JW in North America and pull it off, you got to think of this guy right here, Shazam. I mean, he's good where he's at. He's decent. But he could be something really, really special. And Tempo Storm as a whole could be really special if it was them working off of Shazam's nutty aggression and Shazam being this nutty aggressive player, instead of Shazam working off of, like, let's say Roka, Rix's aggression, Automatic's aggression, and them going from there. I think Rix and Roka will play really well. Automatic will get to do the things that he wanted to do. I think he might even get to lurk. I don't know if necessarily Tempo Storm might even believe in, like, you're lurking and we're going to put you in positions where you can lurk and play off of, like, our aggression or throw fakes for us, and we can play off of that, and then we can aggress and you can play off of our aggression while they're rotating off you. Or if they'll basically just have an open team where pretty much, I mean, Rix can do it. Obviously, he's shown his ability to lurk, and so can Stanislaw. I mean, pretty much so can Roka. So they have a lot of versatility on this roster. That's the last thing that I wanted to talk about. And what you find in the beauty of versatility is even if you have roles and you have defined ideas and defined concepts as a team of what you want to do and responsibilities, so you want to all understand what you're doing and you become masters at it, you can still be versatile enough that when the time comes for it, you can really make a difference on a team even when you're playing out of your role or playing out of your position when the time is right for it. And that's so crucial. That can really change games and win rounds for a player to be able to be a switch. You know, when his team needs him to be aggressive, he can do that and he can do it successfully. And when his team needs him to be passive, he can do that and he can make the passive plays and really work off that. Work off, you know, passivity and patience and being methodical, filling things out, working things out, and then you know, playing from there and making plays from there. And a player like not Glorens, but Stanislaw is able to do that. A player like Roca is able to do that. A player like Rix is kind of able to do that. A player like Automatic is definitely able to do that. So you have all these switch players on this team, and what you have is this versatility that can work in their favor quite a bit. And if Shazam could just become the JW of this team, we could see an extremely exciting tempo storm with a lot of extremely exciting Counter-Strike being played. And I think if nothing else, they should just be fun to watch. Tempo Storm should just be fun to watch and should just be the team with the most bravado. When you have Roca and Rix on a team, you're already going to have quite a bit of bravado. And even a guy like Automatic. So if Shazam could dial it up, that would be awesome. That'd be great. And I've been able to see these guys clutch. So they can actually work off of that, definitely, especially somebody like Rix. And that's the biggest thing really for Tempo Storm, is just being able to be versatile and maybe even getting somebody like Shazam to do really well for them.